This episode of The Startup Life is brought to you by People Ready. Startup Nation, you have a lot on your plate. The last thing you need to stress about is finding quality staff or the available work you need to be successful. Save time and headache by working with a trusted staffing partner that meets your everyday needs. People Ready is a national staffing provider with over 600 locations across the country and 30 plus years of experience serving people just like you. They specialize in a variety of industries including retail, manufacturing, logistics, general cleaning, hospitality, construction, and more. People Ready understands that you're busy and on the go. That's where their mobile app, JobStack, comes in. Use the app to place orders or find work 24/7 or wherever you are. And as social distancing continues to change the way we interact with customers, colleagues, and our everyday lives, JobStack provides the ability to find the right temporary workers or work you need while eliminating the amount of physical touch points needed in the staffing process. Visit peopleready.com/startup life to learn more about how you can partner with People Ready.
It's time to be about that life, the startup life. Here's your host, Dominic Lawson.
All right, Startup Nation, so I hope you're ready to receive some value today. My name is Dominic Lawson, and this is The Startup Life, the show for entrepreneurs and career-minded professionals. You know, Startup Nation, The Startup Life is based here in Memphis, Tennessee. I love my state. I love my state for so many reasons, but one of the reasons I love Tennessee is that, like, you may not know this or not, but we are a booming business state. We are a booming state when it comes to entrepreneurship, and we have a great guest to kind of help drive that point home even more. She is the founder and CEO of PopVox, an innovative advocacy platform that meshes legislative data with individual personal stories and sentiment. PopVox was the winner in the social media category in 2011's South by Southwest BizSpark Accelerator Startup Competition. She was named a top 100 most creative people in business by Fast Company in 2012. And she is also a board member of one of my favorite organizations, Launch Tennessee, and an advocate for entrepreneurship across the volunteer state. She is Marci Harris. Marci, how are you, ma'am?
Hey, thanks so much for having me. I'm good. Thanks, Dominic. How are you?
I am okay. I can't complain. You know, taking it day by day with everything going on around us, but I can't complain.
These are strange days. These are
very strange days. Marci, are you ready to pour some knowledge into Startup Nation today? Because we can surely use some help.
Well, I'm very excited to talk to you. I'll put it that way.
Fair enough.
I'll give you what I've got.
I hear that. So, Marci, if you would, just kind of share with us your origin story and your background a little bit.
That question's always a fun one because you never know how far back to go. But I'll say I'm originally from Lexington, Tennessee.
Okay.
And grew up around there. I currently live in Silicon Valley and have been out here for about 10 years.
Gotcha.
I got here by way of Congress, which is not a very conventional path. I went to law school at the University of Memphis, and actually after finishing up law school there, moved to D.C. to work in Congress as a staffer,
right,
and ended up getting very frustrated with the way that information flows to and through Congress, and started a list of all the things I thought somebody should fix, and everybody I took it to told me good luck with that, and it became the kind of idea that I'm sure a lot of your entrepreneurial listeners know well, that just kind of obsesses you and takes you over and decides it's going to tell you what to do, which is you're going to go and start this project whether you like it or not.
Right.
So I ended up moving out to California in 2010 to start what became PopVox with a couple of great co-founders,
Gotcha.
And have been doing it ever since.
Gotcha. Thank you for sharing all of that, for sure. And you talked about this, and I saw this in my prep, that, you know, you said that you were kind of a congressional staffer and stuff like that, and you worked for Representative Pete Stark, if I got that correct.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Just, if you would, because I know he was, in Congress, and he was a businessman and stuff like that. Kind of talk about some of those lessons and ideals that you learned from him.
Well, Pete was a great member to work for. He had been in Congress longer than I'd been alive, so
Right.
he and his staff were very, very knowledgeable about the way things worked around there, and especially his chief of staff became a wonderful mentor for me, and knew the backstory on everything that had happened around the place for the previous 30 or 40 years, which was fantastic. I remember, it's interesting for staffers because when you go to work for a member, it doesn't mean that you align completely on every position that member has. And I remember I was making a recommendation around a particular topic that was not completely aligned with the historic position of Mr. Stark. And the press secretary came up to me and he said, "Marci, P. Stark has been in Congress longer than you've been alive. Is this really the hill you want to die?" No, that's fine. Yeah. I'll adjust my recommendation here. But working in Congress was an absolute privilege, and my work still is very intertwined with what happens there. It's not always the most technologically advanced place in the world,
Gotcha.
and that means there's a lot of opportunities to help folks do things better and more efficiently. Unfortunately, the people who understand technology don't often understand Congress, and quite frankly, vice versa. Right. So that's put me over the years in a position of kind of being an ambassador or a translator at the intersection of those two pieces of the Venn diagram. And it's a privilege to be able to kind of sit there and try to help both sides understand each other better and do things a little bit more efficiently and effectively for the American people.
For sure. I'm glad you said that. Quick follow up, if I could, because there's a lot of let's just be honest, divisiveness kind of going on out there and stuff like that. When you are in your work in PopVox and stuff like that, you just kind of talk about the importance of being civil, even though we disagree a lot. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, my family background is I have a very, very, very conservative Republican father and a very, very, very liberal Democratic mother. And they divorced when I was 5. And I would say I went back and forth from one house to the other, arguing the opposite point of view at the kitchen table. And that was very helpful for me because I learned how to see different issues from the opposite perspective, and also how to disagree and still love the person you disagree with, and to see where they're coming from. That's not necessarily the way everybody gets introduced to these issues. And you're right, there's so much acrimony right now. At PopVox, we are simply a platform, so we're not editorializing anything at all. We also, it's a line that we walk very carefully, because sometimes a little explanation about a process or what's going on or what's happening is actually really necessary to help people understand even how they can engage. But we're really, really careful to be very neutral and to work with people of any political persuasion or chamber or geographic area. But it is a challenge right now. It's a challenge not just for the folks on the outside, watching, everything gets so nationalized. People are watching cable news and everything seems like it's a big fight. Right. But also for the members on the inside, right now they really need to figure out how to get something done. And that's going to involve sitting down at the table with each other and actually working it out.
For sure. Thank you for sharing that. And Startup Nation, I wanted to ask that because look, you're working in your businesses right now, many of you, and you have team members who come from all different walks of life. They come from all different, type of diversities of thought, if you will. So I just think it's important, whether it be about politics or even the work that you do in your company, that it's okay to agree to disagree from time to time, and we can all be civil about that. So Marci, thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that.
That's a good point. It's a really good point you make. It doesn't just happen in politics. It happens in all facets of our life, for sure.
Absolutely. And you know what? I want to ask you this because, I know one of the things that you are an advocate for is, and I know you're there in Silicon Valley, that, tech should be there to improve humanity, should be for the benefit of humanity. Kind of talk about your doctrine and your belief when it comes to that, if you don't mind.
Absolutely. There has been a long discussion about how to get people involved in tech that are not just the usual suspects. And I experienced this a lot when I first got out here. And it is just the case that, your typical tech founder fits a certain profile. And I think that in the past has had a lot to do with the idea of startups and technology being a little bit tech for tech's sake. I find that when the conversation shifts to technology for a purpose, how do I solve this problem? How do I help these people? How do I make this thing work better? Then you have a lot of people who think, well, I can learn technology if that's going to be the tool that helps me solve this problem I care a lot about.
Right.
But it is limiting when the on-ramp for technology is just someone who really, really, really loves math and wants to study computer science. But if you can get the poli-sci majors or the English majors or the sociology majors or whoever it happens to be, getting interested in tech because they want to solve a problem in their field, well, now that's a completely different thing. And I know I just jumped into pipeline issues and STEM issues and diversity issues all over the place. But I think that question about whether tech is leveraged for quote unquote for good actually has a lot to do with who's at the table. And I think, it means bringing diverse experiences and perspectives to the table to even think about what technology can be used for and how we leverage that incredible tool. So I care about it a lot. I think it comes into play not just in how the tech is built and what the tech is built for, but how it's financed and things like that. So I think we've got a long way to go to get the models right, to be able to encourage more tech that is built for public purpose and for quote unquote good.
For sure.
But I know that there are a lot of people who are interested in threading that needle.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. Now, Startup Nation, if Launch Tennessee sounds familiar, it's because we had the president and CEO of Launch Tennessee on the show a few months back, Margaret Dolan on the show. And one of the things we talked about, if you remember, was that, basically Tennessee is open for business. Let's be honest about that. So I want to ask you this, Marci, because we talked to Margaret. She had her perspective, and we also talked to the business professor, Dr. Amy Cathy at the University of Tennessee of Knoxville, and she gave her perspective as well. And I want to ask you this, because you're actually, you're there in Silicon Valley, so you have a unique perspective. Kind of talk about, I guess it's a two-part question, so forgive me. I guess one, talk about some of those compare and contrast between Silicon Valley, doing business in Silicon Valley, California, and Tennessee, and kind of talk about why Tennessee is a great place to start a company.
I came out, like I said, in 2010. Mm-hmm. And at that time, it still really was the case that in order to start a startup, what everybody thinks of as a startup,
right,
you kind of needed to be here. It was just the beginning of things like venture capitalists writing blogs and telling you what they wanted to see in a pitch deck, or founders sharing their stories about how they were building their companies. And it was just before books like The Lean Startup or 7 Steps to the Epiphany and other kind of tomes that have become the ultimate everybody reads it books. It was before they were written, and a whole lot of the startup culture existed in person out here. When I first got out here, I remember telling someone, it's like everybody's got a business plan in their back pocket, including your barista at Starbucks. Just everywhere where you looked, someone was pitching, or there was a meetup, or there was an event, and all of those things are on hold now due to COVID. But the kind of physical proximity was important for people who were both thinking about starting a business and needed to learn from others, but also those looking for financing, or just kind of to know what was fresh and new, and what kind of understand how others were building businesses. That, I think, began to changed. It hasn't necessarily changed, but to be less limited over the past decade. I saw this first, and I had just come from Washington, D.C., and a pretty active startup community was starting to be built in Washington, D.C. And it started with meetups and all the startups getting to know each other, and they would bring in speakers, and then a little angel community formed, and they started investing. So it just kind of grew from little seeds, and that was kind of when the early discussions about Launch Tennessee began. And the idea behind Launch Tennessee, which I think was so prescient and so forward thinking back in those times in the early days, was to begin to create an ecosystem in Tennessee where that kind of environment could develop. And what I, as someone from rural Tennessee, from rural West Tennessee, was so excited about is it was not just an effort that was focused on Nashville or Memphis or Knoxville or Chattanooga. There was actually a kind of intentional ambition from the start to include rural areas and the various quote unquote grand divisions of Tennessee in the plan for how to build a startup ecosystem. It was a statewide idea. Right. And so, I could talk on and on for ages about how that's developed and the various pivots along the way. But I think that intentionality and the community of people who cared about making a good environment for startups and investors in Tennessee coming together and creating kind of a starting point was really important. And what that has led to over the past several years is each of these communities around, the Memphis ecosystem and the Nashville ecosystem and the West Tennessee ecosystem and Cookeville and Knoxville and Chattanooga and all these places is a kind of hubs that have their own character and they have their own focus. But if you move to one of these areas, you can go find your people. Right. And so in the same way that I kind of felt that business and startups and learning and connecting and networking was everywhere when I first got to Silicon Valley, it's hard to recreate that in a state as wide and big as Tennessee. That's but true. These nodes provide entry points in the different areas, and I think it's a really interesting model that has resulted in bringing a lot of people together for learning, investment, marketing, hiring, etc.
I know I'm excited about the prospects of Tennessee, and growing the entrepreneurial spirit here. And it seems like a lot of businesses, kind of funny that we're talking to you today. It's funny because there's a few businesses who have left California to come to Tennessee. Which is kind of amazing and stuff like that. And then it seems as if we, the residents of Tennessee, have kind of embraced the business doctrine just based on our, political affiliation aside, based on the two past governors that we've had, or who are kind of business minded and stuff like that. And Startup Nation, speaking of Launch Tennessee, coming up pretty soon is the 3686 Entrepreneurship Festival. And you should go ahead and check that out and go ahead and log in and register for that, because it's going to be a fascinating group of speakers and futurists and entrepreneurs and thought leaders about entrepreneurship, about the next phase and stuff like that. And so if you go to the link in the show notes, if you're listening to the replay on the podcast, you can go ahead and register for that right now. So thank you for sharing all of that, Marci. I really appreciate it.
Oh yeah. I appreciate you bringing up 3686. It's been a really interesting event over the years, bringing together, the best of Tennessee music and barbecue and people and things like that. So you can't do virtual barbecue, right. But I think they're doing a great job of really getting an impressive list of speakers and having it go for 10 days this year, virtually, in a way that I think provides an opportunity for the rest of the world to see what Tennessee has to offer. And so I am really impressed with the way that they are taking the challenge of putting on an event in the COVID era and really using it as an opportunity for innovation. I think it's going to be really a feather in the cap of Tennessee.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I actually wanted to ask you this, and speaking of 3686 and it being a virtual conference this year, kind of walk me through that process, because I mean, there's a lot of things that are being, canceled, rescheduled, reconfigured, and stuff like that. And as a board member of Launch Tennessee and looking at this, kind of walk me through the thought process of going this route. Of making it virtual and stuff like that. Just kind of walk me through that decision process, because I think there's a lot of startup founders who can kind of get some value from what you guys had to look at, what you had to assess, what you had to decide, and all those matters.
Well, I have to say, as a board member, my role in this is really to just be very impressed with the way that the staff has handled it, because we don't come up with the good ideas. We just get to hear about them. But I we did have a discussion. I think as they were at the decision point and kind of absorbing the fact that a physical event was not going to be possible, and we did discuss at a meta level what an opportunity it was to invite people to see what Tennessee has to offer, but also to present Tennessee in a way that was not just Nashville focused, to be quite frank. And I remember saying I'd love to see a panel on the banks of the Mississippi and a panel in the mountains, and right. There's a lot there that doesn't always get shared when you're in a conference room anywhere. So I think we had a discussion about the really rich and varied both tech and entrepreneurial environment that Tennessee provides, whether
right.
it's Oak Ridge National Laboratory or the music industry, the healthcare industry, et cetera. So there's a lot there. I was just looking through the program, and what I'm impressed with that I think they've really incorporated well into the program is responding to how the world is changing with COVID.
Right.
And a lot of these panels are about how businesses changed what they were doing
Absolutely.
to respond to the need, or, different ways of working, different product needs, different supply chain issues, et cetera. And I think being able to hear from founders that were making those decisions, or even from government officials that were dealing with the problems, that continue to come at them, I think this is it feels very, very relevant. And right. I'm impressed with the program and the breadth of the coverage. They have several tracks, so entertainment is not the same as healthcare, et cetera. But I think there's also some kind of cross-cutting themes that are emerging in the agility of being able to respond to the moment.
Gotcha.
That I think is going to be really helpful in the program.
Absolutely. I agree with you as well, Marci. Thank you for sharing. All right, Startup Nation. So we're going to go ahead and take a quick break. We got to pay some bills. Once again, my name is Dominic Lawson, and you're listening to The Startup Life. This episode of The Startup Life is sponsored by SaveTheChildren.org. Startup Nation, Save the Children believes every child deserves a future. In the United States and around the world, they work every day to give children a healthy start in life, the opportunity to learn, and protection from harm. They deliver lasting results for millions of children, including those hardest to reach. They do whatever it takes for children every day, and in times of crisis, transforming their lives and the future we share. Startup Nation, right now, the coronavirus is the biggest global health crisis in our lifetime. It threatens children in every way. COVID-19 has already left many children without caregivers, out of school, and exposed to violence and exploitation. Child poverty is rising. With your support, we can help children in unsafe households and help support distance learning in the face of school closures. Here are some ways your support can make a difference. For just $5, you can buy a baby's first book, providing comfort and inspiring lifelong learning. And for $25, you can serve a nutritious breakfast and lunch to 5 out-of-school children in need. And there's many other ways you can help support Startup Nation. So go to savethechildren.org/savekids or www.savethechildren.org/savekids. So if you're ready to make a difference, Startup Nation, remember savethechildren.org. Make the change for children. The Startup Life is powered by Ladder. Startup Nation, as an entrepreneur, you are the engine that powers your business. We have had many entrepreneurs on the show, from those that played Division II basketball, quite a few Ironman participants, and even an NFL quarterback. And the one thing they all have in common is that they know getting early morning workout wins leads to business success for the day. However, it's super important what fuel you use for your workout to get that early morning success. And that's where Ladder comes in. Ladder is a sports nutrition company founded by LeBron James and Arnold Schwarzenegger. Unlike other supplements, every batch is tested by a third party that is trusted by all major professional sports organizations, including the NBA, NFL, MLB, and more, to verify the highest standards for quality, but more importantly, safety. Ladder's goal is to help you unlock your best in any situation. Right now, that means access to special offers and expert advice from their community. Personally, I like superfood greens. Not only does it include the most essential nutrients that are hard to get in your diet, like magnesium, zinc, B vitamins, and vitamin D, they also included the Rodelio root, which helps keep you healthier when stress is high, but also it helps support immunity according to many studies. Use code BETTEREVERYDAY for 30% off everything site-wide at ladder.sport. That's BETTEREVERYDAY for 30% off at ladder.sport. So maybe you're not trying to be a 4-time league MVP or a 7-time Mr. Olympia, but you still need the tools to elevate your health that elevates your business. So go with Ladder and prepare to get better every day. All right, Startup Nation, welcome back as we continue our conversation with today's guest here on The Startup Life. Now, once again, Startup Nation, we're talking to Marci Harris, the co-founder and CEO of PopVox. So, kind of walk me through the early days of PopVox, like maybe right before launch and the idea, and then launch day. Kind of talk about that a little bit.
Gosh, it's been a long time.
Right.
So I'm happy to talk about the early days. I
Sure.
just want to acknowledge that it's been a while. So
It's all good.
And I definitely back then had the great advantage of not knowing how much I didn't know. And so it really started out as an idea to solve my problem as a congressional staffer, which was when it was time for me to make a recommendation to my boss. There were basically 3 questions I needed to answer, which were, who's on it? So for this initiative, who are the co-sponsors? Who are the other members of Congress who are supporting it? Because, these members tend to travel in packs, and they know if this one supports it, they usually are aligned. And if this one supports it, they frequently are not. So who's on it? Where are the groups? So the advocacy organizations or business organizations, what I usually call American Association of Absolutely Anything out there, most members align with kind of, whether it's environmental groups or business groups or labor groups, et cetera. If you know where they stand on the initiative, usually, again, you're kind of helps you get your bearings. And then the third question that we always considered was, are we hearing about it from the district? Are constituents calling and writing in about this issue? And so the original idea behind PopVox was to answer those 3 questions in a tech platform. And so I recruited co-founders, including a technical co-founder, and we started, the process that every new business goes through of, what are we going to call ourselves, and can we get the URL, and how's this going to work? And I had the fortune to meet a longtime entrepreneur and investor named Tim O'Reilly when he was coming to Capitol Hill. You may be familiar with his name. His company runs the Web 2.0 conferences and is O'Reilly Media. So all the little books with the animals on them, that the various coding languages, training and things like that. And shared the concept with him, and he was very, very supportive and basically said, okay, if you decide to do this, let me know. And a few months later, when I had gotten to the point as a congressional staffer that you have ethics limitations on what you can do as an outside activity when you're a staffer. So as I was going to start looking for investment and actually taking this on as a real project, I needed to leave my job working for the government. And so I jumped in the pool, figuratively, and decided my boyfriend was living out here. And so I moved out to California and called up Tim and said, "You said for me to call you when I was ready to do this. I'm ready." And at that point, things kind of it kind of kicked off a flywheel. I pitched to him. He suggested I talk to his VC fund. That was the first VC fund I ever pitched, and that was very instructive. And he came on as an angel investor and made other recommendations of people for us to talk to. And then again, this kind of was the benefit of being in a fertile startup environment, to have events and trainings and mentors to learn from. We entered a program called Luxor, training on lean methods and kind of accelerator for taking an idea from concept to implementation. So that was a 6-week program that really whipped our team into shape and helped us establish processes that continue to this day. But I think everything that I've just described makes it seem as if the path was smooth, and I wouldn't want to leave that impression. I think that the path is deciding to take one step and then to take the next and then to take the next, even though, 2 steps behind, you have no idea what the road's going to look like. And I think often when I talk to people who are thinking about starting something, they want to hear advice about how everything just, unfolded in a very predictable way. And of course, that's absolutely never the case, and nor should anyone expect it to be. If you feel like you don't know what you're doing and what the next step is, you're probably doing just fine.
For sure. And I can tell you, Marci, that we've been doing this for a while. We've had many in Startup Nation to kind of hear a lot of different stories. And I can assure you, I don't think anybody would have just assumed that it was like very smooth or anything like that, for sure. So no, you don't have to worry about that at all. But I do want to ask you about this, because, you talked about pitching to a VC, and that's not something that a lot of startup founders, especially, a lot of them that are not in the Valley like you are, have an experience with. Kind of talk about that experience a little bit.
Well, and I actually should caveat that by saying that we ended up not taking VC funds on purpose.
Okay.
I think, and this ties in a lot to your question initially about tech for good. So when we were first starting out, we thought we were a very conventional startup. And the more I learned about startup financing and models and financing, the more I realized that, at least for us as a civic startup, the VC model was not the best for us, because the VC model basically puts you on a fast train to an exit of some sort, whether you're going to sell the company or go public, or and for a civic startup, which we are, the growth is much slower and intentional, and you make decisions in some cases based on a civic mission, as opposed to whether you're going to get bought by Google or something like that. So,
right.
But the VC process was extremely instructive, and ended up meeting a lot of really smart and innovative people. For us, so yes, we did have that first pitch with Tim's VC, which was, it was nice to have a friendly face on the other side of the table when you're doing your first. It still doesn't mean I knew at all what I was doing. But we ended up entering the startup competition. You mentioned this in the intro, at South by Southwest in 2011. And this was back when, or maybe it was 2012. This was back when South by Southwest startup competition was a really big deal. Twitter had won a few years before and had launched them into the stratosphere. So it was a really big deal to be there. And also winning was a really big deal not money. I think we won $4,000 and we really needed it at the time. But what it,
I know that feeling.
And right, it also put us on the radar. So we got a lot of meetings from investors out here. It's called, Sand Hill Road is the road where all the VCs have their offices. And so I did a lot of pitching, and that process of distilling your concept down into a very concise slide deck that is constantly evolving. So as soon as you give a presentation, you get questions and you think, oh goodness, I need to adjust that and explain that better and make this look better. But having that slide deck that is basically the externalization of what's happening in your brain about your concept is really, really healthy. And taking that out and getting on, kind of constant questions and feedback and refinement on it is a really rigorous process that I think helps you think through the concept again, even if the ultimate result is that you don't end up taking the financing, which again, as we got to the point where we had a few offers, I realized that the structure of that financing didn't make sense for at least the way that we plan to operate as a civic startup. But there have also been quite a few changes since that time in ideas about how startups are financed or operated. And that includes, I think, some more Tennessee-like approaches, I would say. So okay. A few years ago, a new fund came out, and I knew that actually Tim was involved in this fund as well, called Indie VC. And they had a radical concept, which is that companies should be started with the goal of generating revenue from the very beginning. And that was just, it was, this crazy innovative concept out here because, for so many years, startups have been focused on raising enormous chunks of investment and right. really just blowing through it to juice their numbers and move towards acquisition. So I think having one foot in Tennessee and one foot in California has always been super helpful for us because it kept us kind of grounded. And I think there is still an approach to both financing and building businesses in Tennessee that is less focused, not in all cases, but less focused on financing as the end goal and exit as the end goal, and more building the business and sustaining the company.
Gotcha. Thank you for sharing that. And I definitely appreciate that because, first of all, we don't mind hard work in Tennessee. And I would think that, if you're going to start a business or a company, you would think you would want to generate revenue. So that kind of fun makes sense to me. It actually reminds me because we back in March we talked to Mark Randolph, the co-founder of Netflix, and he talked about how starting a company back in '97 and starting a company now are drastically different. And one of those reasons is because like now it's a lot easier to create a proof of concept to kind of start generating that revenue almost instantly as opposed to when it was in 1997. And so he's saying like that a lot of the idea of like people getting funding and stuff like that has to come with this thing about generating revenue and not just, like you said, juicing numbers. So I definitely understand where you're coming from, and I definitely appreciate you kind of sharing that story as well.
Yeah. Well, and yeah, I think you're absolutely right. There is a tradition of entrepreneurship in Tennessee that I think, Launch Tennessee and other initiatives are building on now. But certainly, I don't think that there is any reason at all that anyone should think that approach is not the right one. I think I think it's being borne out that it is a very important way to look at building a business. One of the things that it's kind of like that old Reese's peanut butter cup commercial where it's like, you got your chocolate and my peanut butter and vice versa. I think there are good things to take from the Silicon Valley model, and there are wonderful things to take from the more traditional kind of middle of the country model.
Absolutely.
And the combination of the two is really good.
Absolutely.
So, Washington used to have this program a few years ago called the 10, where it would there was kind of a competition of companies from Tennessee, and 10 would be selected, and they would go through this training program and then come out to Silicon Valley to pitch and to talk to people and to learn. And one of the good things I think about that program was that there was a real focus on how to help folks coming from Tennessee think bigger and bigger and bigger about their idea. And it was, and so like make it to the scale that people are pitching in the Valley, which is great, because I think that emphasis on thinking, how big could this be? What would this look like if it went worldwide? Like what's the blow out the windows vision of this thing?
Right.
Because, let's face it, our culture in Tennessee is a little bit more modest. We think,
right.
Okay, I'm going to put one foot in front of the other and I'm going to make this work. And so, having someone push you to think, what's the biggest this could be is a really important
It absolutely is.
thing. But then also I would say, and this was especially true for me, being in the midst of all this big thinking and exaggeration and hyperbole, and everything's got more zeros than you could ever imagine. And,
right.
Everybody's going to tell you how they're absolutely the greatest and they're revolutionizing this and that and whatever. Really very important to have a grounded conversation about fundamentals and what your actual goal is and how you get things done. So I just think that the combination is a really healthy one.
I definitely 100% agree with that. And that's something we always talk about a lot, Startup Nation, that, finding that balance is super important. So I appreciate you sharing that. And trust me, I am not knocking the Valley at all, because like you said, you need to have those conversations of, just how big it is, because imagination and the innovation and that creativity is super important in the entrepreneurial process. Even though, like I said, you do have to put you eventually got to put the ideas to work. Right. And I think that's where we kind of really do excel here in Tennessee in that regard, but we do need to definitely think big and really optimize the work that we want to do in our companies and stuff like that. So I appreciate you sharing all that, Marci.
Well, and I think where COVID in this weird way might get us to the sweet spot on some of that.
I can see that. Yeah.
We've been locked down here in California for about 4 months now. I mean, it is an extreme, closure. California's been one of the hot spots.
Right.
And work from home is now absolutely accepted as something that's going to be happening long term. I mean, there's not even traffic on the one-on-one anymore.
Right.
People are working differently. Google just extended their work from home policy through the summer of 2021. People are moving out of this area because it costs too much, the traffic's too high. Quite frankly, the internet connectivity is not that good.
Right.
There's lots of reasons that now that you can work from anywhere and connect with anyone and, hold meetings virtually from anywhere, that it's possible to look at lots of different places. So that's where I really think that, Tennessee, with its low cost of living and no income tax and wonderful fiber to the home in lots of places and developing entrepreneurial ecosystem and really nice, smart people, that there's so much there that is really a wonderful place for people from all over the country and the world to go and start businesses and work together, or for employees who are working at big companies like Google and Facebook and others to relocate to Tennessee and have the experience of a house with a little bit more room to move around than the apartment that it costs bazillions of dollars to buy in this area. And but perhaps that mobility and the ability for people working on these kinds of companies to live anywhere gets us to a place where we can have even more of that cross-pollination of the different ways of approaching things.
Gotcha. Thank you for sharing that. And I want to ask you this, but because I have friends who are here in Tennessee, and they say, I have this tech idea and this and the other, but I gotta move to the Valley. And don't get me wrong, I love the Valley. A lot of great innovations. You cannot deny that. A lot of amazing innovations have come out of Silicon Valley, right?
Absolutely, sure,
for sure. But I think sometimes we have this idea that we have to be in a certain place, you have to be in that place in order to be successful. And you kind of talked about this with the remote working from anywhere and stuff like that. But I want to ask you this, because I hear all the time that it's pretty savage, for lack of a better phrase, out there in Silicon Valley doing business and competing with one another. Kind of talk about from your vantage point, kind of talk about a little bit about just how competitive it is in Silicon Valley.
That's an interesting question. I might have had more insight on that a few years ago.
Okay.
But, I think, part of our journey has been realizing how much we weren't a traditional Silicon Valley company and how much we didn't really need to be in that same game. I mean, certainly okay. I'm still in the area and interacting with folks in the industry, but that was part of the lesson, was realizing that a lot of the pressure and the competition that you're describing, which is certainly very real, was not as important as it seemed. And it's funny now, after being here for 10 years, I feel like I've witnessed 3 or 4 generations of companies come and go. The companies that were leading articles in TechCrunch and presenting at Disrupt, and right. They were everywhere and their offices were big, and then all of a sudden one day they're gone, and some of them are quote unquote acquired, but right. you start to learn that actually means nobody actually got paid except the VCs maybe, and there's right. You kind of realize that a whole lot of that competition and hype and is in many cases not backed up with a whole lot of substance. And gotcha. So seeing so many come and go, and not all by any
of course
stretch,
not,
but a whole lot.
Right. No.
A whole lot.
Oh, for sure. Because we hear those stories all the time coming out of the Valley. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, not at all.
No, go ahead.
Yeah. So, I know now I sound like the old woman sitting on the porch, but, they come and go. It never right. was as all that stuff was never as important as it seemed, and so I think the people who do best in the midst of all of that are the ones who don't get too wrapped up in it.
For sure. And this goes back to what you were saying earlier, having that duality, that balance between big ideas and doing the work and one foot in front of the other. That modesty, if you will, is super important, because look, we talk to startup founders a lot of times, all the time. We get invited to panel discussions and stuff like that. And people, you have those one-on-one conversations I got to have an office space, and I got to put a ping pong table over here, and I got to have my name and lights over here. And it's none of that is revenue generating activities. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And so I understand exactly what you mean. And we actually had, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Jay Myers. He was had a ISI here in Memphis, Tennessee, and big in telemedicine and stuff like that. And he's made the Inc. 5000 list a couple of times, 7 times, right? And he talked about the first time he was on it, the number one company that was there is no longer in business. It goes to what you were saying, is it's literally sometimes here one day and gone tomorrow. So I really hope you caught all that, Startup Nation, because I think what Marci talks about, that duality, that thinking big, but also that modesty is just super important, especially in this day and age of entrepreneurship.
Well, and just to add to that, I think, sure. As you were talking about friends and others who have ideas and are looking to get started, one of the, I think, disservices that's been done in the past for people with an idea that could become a startup is this pressure to raise money as a first step.
That's true.
Or to see raising money as the goal or right. the milestone. And I definitely understand the pressure and the need to do that, but in so many ways, and to your point that you were making earlier, that it's so much easier now to build a prototype or to get some kind of
proof of concept, right?
Proof of concept out there, exactly. That focusing on building instead of raising is in so many ways the better way to go. And of course it makes it easier to raise down the road too, if that's where you're headed. And sometimes you don't need to do that if the building goes well. And that's easier said than done, because of course if you're balancing another job or you're balancing other obligations, it's tough to do that. But it's just kind of back to that balancing. The goal is to build a business. The goal is not to raise money. Raising money may be necessary as a part of building a business, but that's not how success should be determined.
Oh, that's a quotable right there, Startup Nation. Focus on building except raising. I appreciate you sharing that. That's a quotable. That's a hot take right there. I appreciate you sharing that for sure. Once again, Startup Nation, we're wrapping up with Marci Harris, co-founder and CEO of PopVox. So, Marci, I want to ask you this. What's your entrepreneurial superpower and why?
Learning to listen to my gut.
Okay.
And that I would, again, when we first started out, we read everything we could get our hands on and tried so hard to act like we thought the real startups acted.
Right.
And what we realized is, a hard won lesson is that listening to our gut and doing exactly what felt right was actually the right way to go. So even, you can listen to lots of smart people who have great examples of things that worked for them, but ultimately figuring out what works for you is the way to go.
For sure. Thank you for sharing that. And before I ask the last question, I just want to say thank you so much for coming on the show, Marci. We really appreciate your time. Startup Nation, go to popvox.com to check out Marci and her amazing company and her team and everything in between. And also there in the show notes, make sure you register for the 3686 Entrepreneurship Festival. Once again, if you're listening to the replay on the podcast, we have a link there in the show notes for easy access. And Marci, I'm actually just going to turn the microphone over to you because we're living in some strange times, like you said earlier. And so we could use a little bit of encouragement, and because, there's a lot of doom and gloom out there. If you would give some words of encouragement to take us out for the day, if you don't mind, please, ma'am.
Well, I appreciate that. And it's such a pleasure to talk to you. I really appreciate that you bring these voices together and help people find out what's happening across the state and in innovation in Tennessee. I do think there's going to be a lot of wisdom shared at 3686. And so I would encourage everybody to sign up there. On the question of how we look at things right now, I do think that what is interesting about these strange days is that it is showing us that status quo is not an option. It is showing us that innovation and doing things differently are really the only way forward, because nothing's going to be the same as it was before. So there's a lot of folks who are fighting that, and it will continue to be difficult as they cope with the fact that things have changed so significantly and will be so changed when we come out on the other side of this, whatever that happens to be. But for those who can see change as an opportunity and think about what kind of world we want to build on the other side of this, and what kind of products are going to be needed and services, and how people are going to interact with each other on the other side of this and build businesses. There's a lot of opportunity there, not just opportunity, I think, in a financial sense, but opportunity to really do things better and to your point, to leverage technology for good. So I just really appreciate the opportunity for having this discussion today, and I look forward to staying in touch and to hearing from some of your listeners down the road, and perhaps connecting at 3686.
Absolutely. I look forward to all of that for sure. And once again, Startup Nation, that's going to wrap up this session of The Startup Life. We want to thank Marci Harris for coming on the show. Thank you so much, Marci.
Oh, it's an honor. Thanks again.
No
Take
worries.
care.
All right. And as
Bye-bye.
always, Startup Nation, if you have an idea, be about that life, The Startup Life.
If you want to let us know what you think about our show, have an idea for a show topic, or would like to advertise on our show, send us a message on the Startup Life Podcast Facebook page. And while you are there, like and follow our page as well. It's a great way for us to engage with you, Startup Nation, and really grow our community. The link is there in the show notes. Subscribe to the show as it can be heard on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher Radio, Spotify, or even on your Facebook timeline or any other platform you like to get your podcast. If you are listening on Apple Podcasts and you find our content valuable, please give us a 5-star rating as it will help us climb the charts and help more people find our show. You can also listen to the show on the Startup Life Podcast new website. There you will find the all-new startup blog where I write on many topics that are interesting and helpful to you on your path to entrepreneurship. And hey, if you have an idea, be about that life, the startup life.